Specifically, the question that we've been asked today is there a future for HR? Now, as I said, I head up the research at the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and I genuinely believe that whilst we're hearing about how the world of work is changing rapidly, it's just never been a more exciting time to actually work in HR. There are so many opportunities. Again, we've heard about sort of crises of trust, the changing sort of business working models. Haven't heard it called sort of swarm model, but lots of real changes and challenges for the way people are managed, which I think presents a huge opportunity for sort of HR to step up and really demonstrate its contribution. But there are three other people here with me that we're going to address this. So I would like to introduce my fellow panelists. First of all, I've got in the centre here, El Cavanalomas from Cisco. On the far side there, I've got Ken Mankey from Unilever, and immediately by my side, David D'Souza, who's an independent consultant. To start off with, I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves, and if you can, just sort of in a quick sentence, maybe give your thought as to, is there a future for HR? El, I'll start with you.
You can. I'm El Cavanalomas. I'm the HR Director for the Emerging Theatre at Cisco Systems. That means a group of about 84 countries across Africa, the Middle East and Russia. And I've been at Cisco about 3.5 years after joining through acquisition, so it's seen a very changing workplace. And to the question, is there a future for HR? First of all, I hope so, because I think we've worked very hard to bring it to where it is today. I do think, though, it has to be something different, and I'm not going to make the sort of cliche comment about HR needing to have a seat at the table, which I think is the common answer to this question. For me, I think if HR are going to have a future, it is as catalysts for change and as solutions architects. So much more testing the proposition, would the business pay for your service? If we were a professional services firm, would we be paid, and can we therefore add value? So that's my sort of test in that sense.
Excellent, thank you. Ken, can I move on just for you to introduce yourself?
Of course, thank you, Vanessa. Ken Mankey, I'm the head of what we call workplace services at Unilever. So property, real estate. But my background before that was HR. So in a traditional Dave Ulrich model for Whirlpool, but also Unilever, I ran all of our HR services globally. So given that I'm not in HR, but I've got a background in HR, my answer is absolutely. In fact, I think HR has an increasingly important role in an organization. A lot of the reasons Al mentioned really on the front end to be a driver of change. But if, in fact, last week I was on a similar panel, and I sat next to Gareth Williams, who's the head of HR for Diageo, and he coined a phrase, businesses run on people. And I think that it really captures where HR has a chance to make an impact with the business. The areas that we all know we've got an increasingly important role to play, particularly from an HR perspective. What's the culture of the organization that you want? How do you drive the right levels of engagement across the organization? How do you develop not just the current leaders, but the next generation of leaders within your business to lead your business? And I think across all those dimensions, where you have HR that really partners with the business with impact, they can make it and really drive a competitive advantage.
Excellent, thank you very much. Final introduction, David.
My name is David D'Souza, and I'm now a swarm-focused organisational hacker after the last presentation. So I'm delighted with that change. I feel I should differ from my panellists just to make this afternoon more interesting for you. So I think HR in its traditional format is really on its last legs. That doesn't mean that there isn't value in the proposition as a whole, but I sincerely hope that if you came back in 2018, HR would look so different that you wouldn't even recognise it as the same profession. I think it's overly bureaucratic, too rules-based, and I think it's evolved from the typing pool, and it needs to find a way of evolving from business and what works in business, rather than having its roots in an administration process.
Excellent. Right, well that sounds like we're going to have some good conversation now that you've just managed to diverge slightly. Just before we go on, sort of show of hands, are people in the audience audience that are in HR themselves? A few.
Qualification.
Okay. So on the whole, actually, maybe it's people here have less of a vested interest. So we might come back to that later on, maybe in the question time, to sort of see what your views are around the future for HR. But I think what some of the things we've been hearing, you sort of need potentially for HR to evolve, but actually where it potentially can add value is around sort of leading on change, leading on culture change, engaging employees, and actually sort of something sort of solutions architects. Perhaps first we can sort of pick up around the whole area of engagement. And I think one of the things that I feel is that, you know, if HR is to be truly impactful and to really merit having a future role, it does really need to demonstrate its impact. And I think to your point, David, you know, that from a business perspective, not from a HR for HR's sake. And to do that, really, I guess the sort of the whole metrics demonstrating its value will be a key element of that. We know employee engagement has been one, if you like, tool or one way that HR potentially has sort of said, well, look at the engagement scores. But you know, the sort of question I guess I have is it possible in practice to sort of get beyond the engagement scores? The engagement scores, do they really have a role to play? Elle, I don't know if you want to address that.
Yeah, I do. So employee engagement is a tool that I have always struggled to quite get to grips with what it means. I think what it's trying to say is that it's about what employees do, whether that leads to how they feel about their work is whether they apply discretionary effort, as in do they do a better job because of how they're feeling in the workplace. And I think it ties to everything that's going on here today. But I think that in terms of data and science to make decisions, etc., I think it's critical. I think you've heard already today a bit about big data. I don't think we can go on gut anymore. We've got to be able to demonstrate value back to the business. Do I think engagement scores are the answer? I'm not so sure, because I think engagement scores often become a measure of how happy people are or how satisfied they are. And I support the emerging markets, which is culturally radically different to the market here in the UK or even to the US. And I think that what I see is really great engagement scores. People think, you know, they're very engaged, they rank us very highly on surveys. But the business results don't necessarily correlate with that. The business results show that we are in fact struggling this quarter in some of our emerging countries. And therefore, I think if we say that engagement is the measure of whether the business is doing well or not, I don't think that that can be accurate. What I do think is that engagement is not about, you know, taking your team to lunch to boost their morale and things like that. It's a much bigger play than that. And it's about really the quality and the meaningfulness of interactions with people's manager. You know, people say that they don't leave a company, they leave their manager. And I think it's about the quality of that interaction that you have with your manager that determines a lot of it. And I think HR need to create an overall system that works within a company from all aspects of HR, org design, whatever it may be. And that then engagement has a place in there, but it's not all about that.
And have you been doing a lot of work yourselves around this space in Cisco?
So we're doing a lot of work on engagement, but we're trying to, you know, we've just done some restructuring in the business, and then we're talking about re-engagement, you know, what is it like to come back from that kind of process? And I think what we're trying to do is new and innovative things, take advantage of technology. We're launching, for example, a new recognition tool. And that tool is a tool more aligned to the future. It's where you can recognise it's not just boss to employee, it's peer-to-peer. It's using your mobile phone to give recognition to somebody and make that award, rather than doing something more formal via some kind of serious mechanism. We're trying to look at small changes to that. A lot of our engagement at Cisco comes from our flexible working practice. We've seen people changing their approach to working. We saw Yahoo bring people back into the office. Other companies doing that. Cisco, we operate the opposite of that. You can essentially work, as long as you're legally in the right country, you can work from wherever you want. So therefore, again, it ties back to my point about the relationship with the manager. If you don't have a strong relationship and you're not tied into something, if you're not coming into the building and feeling the brand and feeling that, I don't think that you can feel as engaged.
Okay, thank you. That's really great. I'd like to sort of move on now. I think it's going to maybe come back to you, David, and you highlighted the fact that HR needs to move away from being sort of overly bureaucratic. I'd sort of be interested in your thoughts on what really is required of HR to start, I guess, being on the front foot. Maybe we talked about change, so sort of leading change agenda rather than following.
I had a great quote last week, which is that HR needs to be more like a trampoline and less like a speed bump. And I think when people think about their HR departments, it's rarely with genuine affection, and that's because we've been concentrating on controlling the business rather than helping it grow. And I think it's a shift in mindset, but it's also probably a shift in people that come into the profession in terms of having an expertise and understanding what businesses need to get better, to get more fluid, to adapt more effectively, rather than how can I control this and minimise risk. So I was at the CIPD conference last week, and I spoke to a whole host of professionals who work in allegedly the same field as me, obsessed with risk, obsessed with the risk of social media, obsessed with the risk of technology. If you stamp down on those things, you reduce your business's ability to grow, and you face a far greater risk, which is that your company will cease to exist. So the great thing about the last speech was talking about, in 5 years, some of the biggest companies in the world will not exist now. I guarantee they will not have overly onerous HR processes getting in the way of them doing business. They'll have HR professionals who are working out the best way of helping accelerate their people, helping them grow, helping them bring in new technology, and integrate it, and helping people be themselves. And that's a huge shift from where we've historically been as a profession, which is, can we get the payroll right? Can we process, tribunals, employee relations cases? It's just a different ballgame altogether.
And do you think that to make that shift in 5 years' time, it will actually require HR people to not be called HR?
There's something about labelling. I mean, I hate the concept of employee engagement. We've had it for 10 years, and what's changed? Not a huge amount. We just talk about the definitions because it keeps us busy and it gets us writing blogs. I think, whether you have a people department, a people solutions department, a people architects department, a human resources department, or a personnel department, if essentially they monitor process, they will kill your business. If you have an HR department full of passionate people who are going to do great things and help you get better, I'm not really fussed about the naming conventions. I think people smell intent, and if you recruit a group of people intent on controlling your business and stopping it growing into what it can be, it doesn't really matter what you call them, you'll fail.
Yeah. I was actually taking it one step further, I think, and saying, would actually to actually do good people management, to do a lot of things you're talking around sort of, freeing up people, enabling HR to be seen as the trampoline, is it actually just putting good people management into other parts of the business, putting these disciplines, these practices, these enabling things rather than these control things into different areas?
Yeah, it depends on the nature and size of the business. I think what works for a 50-person business that's growing won't necessarily work for a multinational. So I think there's an understanding of what can be centralised and what shouldn't be centralised. I think the HR tag is unhelpful because I find myself introducing myself to people as I work in HR, but not like that. And that's not a great thing. That should be banking, that shouldn't be HR. So I think whatever we call it, there's a schism happening currently that needs to be accelerated. So actually the people who are fantastic at administration and keeping things on the right track can do that and be respected for it. But the people who want to help shape businesses have got to shape to operate.
Yes,
What I would say is we've seen a move in Cisco to move what I would call the baseline to another organisation, to what we call our Global Business Services organisation. So that means that what you're talking about, the mundane, the administration, the payroll, even to a certain extent what we call employee relations delivery, all sits now in a different organisation, meaning that there are experts who can focus on it. You can also leverage other groups. If you've got IT sitting in there and other streams of work, or you've got similar type case responses, you can really leverage that. But what that leaves then is this organisation that I talked about, I think, at the start, which has got to be just about change agents and something that's architecting solutions for the business need and leading the way rather than just following. So, I think that's a fair point. And the label, you're right. I mean, when I tell people that I work in human resources, I mean, my mum's a classic. She always said, personnel. And I say, no, it's not personnel. To her, she's more comfortable with that. But I don't think we've got the label yet for what we're going to become, whether it's we just integrate into the business as change agents of some kind.
Okay. Ken, do you have anything to add to this conversation? If not, I will move on.
That's really harsh intro.
Funny thing is, the conversation on spending too much time on risk and control and starting business growth. When we talk about HR or property, because we often have that same debate to where you've got that same challenge as a workplace property function. And the reality is, I think all functions, all departments do. To kind of build on a little something that Dave was saying is, no doubt, I think the HR as a function has to continue to evolve. So a lot of, at least the organizations I've been a part of or have seen, a lot of focus inward. So same thing with Cisco, coming out of restructuring program across restructuring program, you tend to gravitate all your time towards those internal change programs, and less time focusing on what do you do to increase the business growth? What do you do to take the business model from where it is now, continue to accelerate and expand it, which is a very different focus, different behavior, different energy. And I think same as what we have to do in the property function, I think is the same thing in HR, is get back to better understanding the psychology of change, better understanding some of those external trends and business drivers, and then really understand your business and how do you support that growth ambition. And I think those are similarities that I see both in our HR and our property function that we know we've got to continue to evolve or we're going to be in trouble.
Okay, thank you. And now, what I'm quite keen to sort of explore with each of you is maybe the sort of huge, I guess, impact that technology is already having, but can have more in accelerating potentially some of these changes. Well, sort of technology is not the be all and end all, but I think whether it be social media, to your point, let's not call it a risk. Let's see some of these things as opportunities. Crowdsourcing, getting people's engagement, their buy-in. What are your thoughts on the impact technology can really have to enhance HR? David?
The world's increasingly connected, the world's faster, quicker, more complicated. Our ability to cope with that hasn't significantly changed over the centuries. We're possibly a little bit smarter, but what we need is connections and the ability to gain ideas, to gain impetus, motivation from different sources. Technology allows us to do that in a way that has never been possible and probably would have been dreamt of 10 years ago. The challenge now is how do you embrace that in the workplace, and the way that you do that is to stop creating an artificial barrier between someone's home life and what they do at work, and understand that the more that they can be a whole person within the workplace, the more effective they will be as an individual. So if what you're constantly doing with social media is waiting for someone to say the wrong thing about their boss so you can sack them, and that's your policy, it's hugely restrictive on them as a person. If what you're looking for is them to create networks and for them to connect with people so that they have better ideas, different richer views of the world, then you have to embrace technology. And we're not doing it fast enough as a profession. We are still worried about, what happens if someone tweets this? Well, do you know what? You deal with them as an adult. And the issue is that we treat people as infants in our policies and our approach, and that's not helpful to anyone.
So I think I agree with your point about the whole tweet. Before this job I'm in now was the head of employee relations, and we spent the whole time worrying about what people were tweeting and what they'd done wrong or in that capacity. What I find now is that we're really trying to embrace new technologies. So we use at Cisco a site called WebEx Social, which is a site where it's essentially an internal blog and an internal information sharing system. You can tweet in the same way within that, but to create, I think people need senses of community, and I think technology helps to build that. So I think if we can have people connecting in a different way within the company, then I think they're sort of replicating the same kind of chat that they've had on Facebook or something like that. But it is in a sort of, at the moment for us, a sort of slightly safer environment. And I don't think we do worry about the risk very much of that. I think the other technology I see being used radically in Cisco is telepresence, so it's video technology. Because to Dickens' point right at the start about you can have 3 continents talking at one time. Well, I've done that this morning. I interviewed candidates in Russia, Africa, and the Middle East via telepresence, running a panel from also around the world, and in a very efficient and effective way. So the interview was completed in an hour and a half, with multiple interviewers around multiple locations with candidates around the world. So I think from that perspective, starting to really embrace technology and do things a bit differently, particularly when you're trying to attract people in. So if you're talking about millennials and people's interest in the future, you know, if you're not using the right tools to do your recruitment and other areas of technology, I don't think we stand a fighting chance in HR at all. So I'm with you on that.
Vanessa, to expand on that, but coming from a different perspective. So, yes, certainly making the tools available and increasingly using it to connect the organization, connect leaders into the organization, the outside world in a B2B, B2C context. But I think there's a significant role that HR increasingly needs to play. And that is, you've got a good percentage of the population that can just pick up on these tools and run. But you have a lot of others that cannot. And so I think that behavioral, that change component of increasingly using the technology for good, I think is an area that certainly our organization, most organizations look past. I think that's an area that I'd love to see HR play more of a role in helping in that behavioral change component.
Okay, that's really interesting. We're actually doing some research at the CIPD specifically on social media at the moment, and sort of it's interesting that whilst we'd thought that there would be, I guess actually a lot more progressive activity going on, the people that we surveyed still seem to really distinguish using sort of social technology for their personal use, and it is not as prevalent in the workplace as you might think, and it is not to do with rules and risk, and you're going to get sort of into a tribunal or something bad. It is just actually people don't see it's relevant for their job yet. So I think to your point, actually, there's something there about the education and the encouraging the behavioural change for work, when it's something people might be doing quite instinctively for home life outside of work activities.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is half of our profession can't use Excel, right? So you're going back in a long chunk of time to get used to that. So asking them to use social media platforms rapidly and understand the way that interacts with people and how that fundamentally changes the way that you connect is a real challenge. We're, not a progressive function in that we should be representing the very cutting edge. We should be on the crest of that wave. And I think we're in a different ocean on some of this stuff. So it really doesn't surprise me that we're not as close to adopting that as a way of working as we should be. But like I said, we're still scared of the spreadsheets, we're still scared of stats, we're still coming to the kind of realisation we can do big data without actually realising how we should utilise it. So it's not great, is it?
Are you generalising? I feel you defending it.
Well, we've got a short amount of time to do research.
No, I think some of what you say is right. I think probably I would suggest it could potentially extend beyond the HR profession. I think you've already highlighted that maybe there are some parallels in the sort of property world, but I can see, I think that for some people these are just new things that they haven't dealt with in a workplace context.
I also don't think you can say who owns it. I don't think it's like saying HR owns engagement scores.
Yeah.
It's rubbish. HR don't engage it. It's owned by the business, by the managers across the company. And I think the biggest thing in all of this is role modelling. I think it's about starting to use the tools and seeing those different platforms being used and embraced and championed by the leadership in companies will make a difference. That we start to become the norm, so we don't feel like we're sort of stuck in the past. Because I hate to be associated with a profession that is seen that way.
Yeah,
that's why I want to continue working in this.
Okay. I want to, there's one further area that was just sort of triggered by Mark's previous conversation that I'd just like as a sort of a final maybe question for us to discuss maybe before we open it up to see if you've got questions. And that's around the whole sort of issue of trust. And we hear about trust being an issue, I think, at an organisational level, at an individual leader level, at a societal level. And totally reflecting or hearing what you're saying, Elle, actually you shouldn't put responsibility necessarily on one person to fix or one group of people to fix the problem. But any thoughts of I guess for HR to really demonstrate its impact, its relevance, cracking the trust one would be a good one to be seen to be leading on. Any sort of thoughts on how HR might take a lead on helping to restore trust?
I think we need to be in the business of helping companies become more transparent and more principled. I think data to some extent is a red herring in terms of our profession. There's opportunity there. But I actually think you run your company on principles, you understand what it should be delivering, you understand its interaction with customers and with the world. And I think we've got a great role as not delivering it all, but helping be custodians of that and prod companies in the right direction. So if you look at the banking crisis and everything that happened there, and you look at the crisis at the BBC more recently, the role of the HR teams there has largely been to execute things that they believed in their hearts were wrong. If we're going to stand up and be a mature profession, there's a fundamental shift in the way that we interact with the senior teams and our courageousness in whistleblowing ourselves rather than just monitoring the policy that would change things significantly. If we know it's wrong, we need to call it, otherwise we need to not get paid for it.
For me, it's about, and I agree with that point as well about people being speaking out. I think HR have to take on the policeman's hat and not default to that, because I think there's an inclination to default to process because it's comfortable, comfort zone, it's safe to go there when we don't know quite what else to say. And I think the skill of a great HR professional today is to be a fantastic coach, to be able to ask very powerful questions that unlock conversations, that help leaders and managers and whoever it may be to think slightly differently about something. And I think as you do that and things get unlocked and you see progress, then I think you're starting to make a change in the organisation and trust is building. I think while we have departments and people are just frustrated because they didn't get their pay on time and then the HR profession gets written off, I think that's our challenge.
Okay, thank you. Ken?
Yeah, trust is a tough one. I mean, ultimately, what's your ambition? You want consumers to trust your company, trust your products, and then to build a business model around it. And I think where HR can help is to create a greater level of trust in your organization, greater level of trust in leaders, in products, and ultimately you want consumers to trust that organization. Because right now, there's distrust everywhere. And generally, people don't trust their governance, their governments. People don't trust different corporations that they're forced to buy products from. I think those organizations that can separate themselves to create, whether it's trust, that social responsibility, I think there's a massive business model and a competitive advantage towards that. But yet, and ultimately, you have to start with trust inside the organization. And that's where a lot of organizations fall flat in their face. They just don't have that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so true in it is that it sort of is one that you can takes just such a long time to build up, but you can just lose it so quickly as well. That hence sort of the crises that many organisations or parts of organisations are in at the moment. At this point, do you have any questions? Is there anything you would like to ask any of the panel members, questions that you'd like us to address? When the mic gets to you, could you just say your name and where you're from?
Hi, it's Neil McLaughlin from Cushman & Wakefield. A topic of interest to many of our clients at the moment, global clients, is understanding how to, I guess, enhance the performance of global teams. When we're finding a lot of global organisations have teams dispersed, glitched around across time zones around the globe. Managers managing people in totally different offices, totally different countries. To such an extent that one of our recent clients called these individuals who are dispersed around the world orphans. And I guess it gets down to engagement and how to create that sense of belonging amongst these people. But it's a phenomenon that we're seeing a lot more of. And I know particularly Cisco put a lot of people dispersed around the world, and I've seen some stats around that. And I just wonder if there's any experience you could share with us about how to really engage with these people and ensure that they aren't felt as orphans. And I guess that's on the receiving side as well as the individual side, how to ensure that they are welcomed into the organisation and feel part of it, even though they might not be anything to do with a local country or a local enterprise.
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's a continual challenge for us in how to do that. You talk about orphans, we talk about outposts, people who are posted to some far-flung country where there's a lot less people, and it doesn't necessarily feel like Cisco the same way. We do exactly the same as Dickon talked about in terms of the branding, so HSBC's where you can create the same look and feel, but it doesn't mean to say you feel the same way. So for me, I've already touched on the technology point. There is evidence that shows that interactions are 50% more successful if you can see the person, whether that be video, whether that be through a camera on your computer, whatever it is. People feel more connected in if they can see each other. And I think that that is something that we have to try and strive for. And I think also it's a big responsibility on management to actually pull people in. I have my team are based across, I think, 13 different countries. Nobody sits with anybody else. Nobody has a fellow HR professional with them to bounce ideas off. So it's all about, for me, creating community for them. Have they got somewhere to come to share ideas, to share best practice, to brainstorm? Also, can they, can we get together occasionally to try and pull people in? Not very often, to be honest, because our people are so spread. So I think it's really about creating that environment where people can learn from each other and talk to each other and change how you run your meetings. So if you run a meeting by phone, for example, the people who are really outgoing are always going to speak up, and there's always going to be a population who say nothing or very little, and about proactively engaging those people in the conversation so that they can actually contribute something, maybe let them go first and say something. And I think there's all these tiny little mechanisms that you can use. I don't think there's a magic wand. If one of my is going to come up with a magic solution, I'm interested in. But for me, it's all the little ways of attention that makes a difference.
One little add, because similar, it's a great question, similar space. I think 75% of all of our managers across Unilever either have a manager that's in a different country from where they reside, or the majority of their teams in a different country to where they work. And so something simple is, we tend to cascade, whether it's product launches, strategy sessions, regardless, we tend to do it by geography and not natural team. So this way, if you're in a physical sphere, you can gravitate with any other area and part of the business together, so you're not leaving people out. Otherwise, you tend to leave half your organization out. And then not only do they not feel engaged, they feel completely disengaged because they're not part of that broader message or that broader company message. So I think little things like that you have to do. It's got to be a series of things, not just one.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this point?
Hi, Lydia Hatley from Home Retail Group. There was a general consensus among the panel that sort of the current HR professional, the capability of them isn't what we need to actually, for the future, to deliver what we need to deliver for business. So I guess my question is, what are you doing to attract a different type of person and shift the capability that currently exists within the function? And I suppose my really provocative question is, do you think it is possible to shift the capability of a traditional HR person as we know it today?
We would be horribly bad HR people if we didn't believe in personal growth. I think I've shoot myself in the foot with that one. I think, organisations like the CIP have got a massive role to play, and that's in making sure that the curriculums that they create are centred around requirements of businesses now and in the future. And I think the CIPD itself has made a move in that direction over the last 12 months. But if you went on their website 6 months ago and searched for data, as in, let's say something about data, big data, all that kind of stuff, you find an introduction to data protection, which is what you might expect to find in an HR organisation. I think we need to attract people into it, because I don't think people grow up wanting to be in HR, but I do think people want to grow up helping to shape businesses, and that's where we need kind of a rebrand of the profession. And then I think a £1 million kind of base salary entry mark. I don't believe money is the answer to everything, but I'll try and emphasise and see where it gets me. So yeah, I think it can be done. I think embracing technology that people identify with will make it easier and more accessible for people as well. I mean, CIPD doing some great stuff with social media that makes it more attractive for people studying and entering the profession.
I think we made a rookie mistake in HR. So I think we spent ages and ages and ages and ages talking about the Ulrich model, and I buy into it massively, by the way, I love the guy. But I think we spent too long saying what is a business partner and trying to define what that is, and we kind of forgot what you have to do underneath that. So we said, this is what we want to be, and this is how we want to be with our clients, but we didn't say, actually, to have those powerful conversations, if you're not great at data or understand how data can be interpreted, you're not going to be able to bring that to the mix. So I think it's just about fleshing out a bit more with people like the CIPD on the competencies that are really needed. I do think we've come a long way. So to your first point that we think that HR perhaps are not, where they should be, I think they've come a long way just in the time I've been in the profession. So I do see progress, and I think we've got a way to go, but I do see movement. I just want to see us go after those capabilities that are going to make the difference and that are valued by the business, that they see as something that makes us very relevant to them.
I would add a couple of things. First of all, is that I think we can make a sort of sweeping statement about the capability of the profession. There are some exceptionally good individual HR leaders. So I think you don't want to sort of damn everybody by just actually calling out the function needs to raise its game. And there are some really credible HR leaders and HR functions, but I think particularly the leaders. So it's how you actually make sure that what those people are doing what can we learn from how come they got it right? And it's interesting, so last year we did a survey looking at sort of comparison of HR leaders and non-HR leaders of their views of the HR profession. And 9 out of 10 of those senior HR people had worked outside of HR, but it's still seen that when they were back in HR, they sort of lost all of that business acumen, or the perception was they had. So it's how can you sort of hold on to all of the great things. I think there's certainly an element around sort of rebranding of HR as a career. Lots of people at schools don't know what HR is. It's not something you can possibly get your hands around until you've actually started working. It's not quite the same maybe as a doctor or a vet, or I don't know, other professions that are a bit more tangible. But I think there's also something about a sort of confidence of the profession. That there's a lot around, I think, being more visible and demonstrating impact more, as much as actually some of the understanding the numbers, having the technical ability. So I think it's a sort of, on an optimistic note, it's a sort of profession in a bit of a transition. We are trying at CIPD to do a lot around sort of branding ourselves, CIPD wider, so we rebranded ourselves about championing better work and working lives, not sort of helping HR do HR. So I think sort of making our ambition bigger and wider. But agree, it still needs work to sort of reach, I guess, the ambitions that we're all talking to for us to be fit for the future.
Most businesses can be frustrated that their HR functions aren't better. I think they're entitled to more. Lots of HR professionals are frustrated that people haven't kept pace with change. I don't think it's not about good people or bad people. We've just got a slightly outdated and outmoded skill set in some areas.
Anybody with final question, final thought? Oh, two there, maybe they're quick ones, we'll do both.
Hi, it's Jane Kahane. I'm new to Facilities Management Journal. I will be taking over from Kathy Freewords progressively. So I apologise if this is kind of a random question, I hope it's coming on the top of yours, but it's just something that I've picked up on as a theme. You've actually just touched on it very lightly here. I'm just interested in what's happening within HR now to engage introverts, and how that works with all the whole changing office landscape as well. Is that relatively clear on that question?
It is. I don't know, I've got a very straightforward answer to it. I think being much more conscious of the fact that there are different styles. I mean, you're talking about there a little bit in the Myers-Briggs type space, right, where you identify different types and you look at what an introvert needs versus an extrovert. They don't want to be the first to speak, they won't speak at all if they can help it. And I think it's about being a lot more aware of the people that you're working with. So I think if you're a manager, for example, you need to understand what makes each individual in your team tick. I make a point of speaking to each member of my team every week, sometimes every day, but I speak to plenty of people who don't touch their employees for a month, or don't have any kind of dialogue with them.
Not too touching.
Exactly, they don't go near their employees, they don't speak to them for a long time, and I think that you can't expect to have people to understand people better. And I think when we're training, we need to be conscious of different styles in the room. Everything we're doing, we need to be a lot more mindful of it for me. It's about mindfulness, really.
I think that there's lots more research coming out around introversion and putting people in. So that's, I'd say, the last 6 months I've seen a lot more about how you can do it. Some networks forming, which I think is really interesting. But what I would say is some of the most active individuals on social media, which I find really curious, are introverts, because it's a nice, safe way for them, it's a good platform for them to interact and meet other professionals.
And the gentleman next door to you had a question as well.
If we have time, yes.
Yeah, this will be the last one.
I'll make it short. I'm Stephen Lambert from MCS. So Worktech is a lot about workplace, and I'm glad to see HR being a topic in a workplace kind of conference. But when we polled earlier today how many HR people were in the room, it was extremely few. Everybody talks about the super nucleus, HR meeting workplace, meeting IT as a full-blown service to the employee or to the user. But you still see this chasm between the HR world of I'm managing job titles and careers, and I'm attracting millennials, and I'm doing MBTI profiles of people, and then another world of I'm designing workspace that serves certain functions and certain ways of working that completely changes the world of work, but we don't necessarily talk that much. And what do you think needs to happen, either in HR or in general, of building a bridge between those two worlds? Maybe have next year have half the room being filled with HR professionals.
Well, I'll tell you what we're doing internally to focus on this, because I don't think that's true. I think I can see a couple of my Cisco colleagues in the room, and I can say that we do have a relationship, a strong working relationship together. I think that HR people aren't naturally interested in the workspace, and they need to start talking more about that, particularly though in this, we talk about workplace, but we're actually saying that maybe there won't be a workplace. So I think we've got to start to talk about what that's going to be and have that engagement more. But we do it very much by country leadership board approach, to give you a very pragmatic, sort of realistic solution, is by bringing the functions together to have this conversation in a company, to talk much more about what can be done from different angles to make ourselves more impactful across the board, so to break down those silos completely.
I think my comment, having been on both sides, in HR and in property, I couldn't agree more with your comment. I think the reality is, so individually, and organizations from an HR perspective do in pockets see the value of workplace on organizations. But I think by and large, the function is way behind where IT and property and real estate is. And I think it's just because within their evidently priority setting, it's not as high. So I think I would love to see as a function in the next 3-4 years, the recognition of the value that that workplace, the virtual and physical place can have to the organization, how you grow the organization. I would love to see that elevate in terms of that priority listing.
Thank you.
We've decided to put facilities and real estate under HR, because facilities are in essence there to serve human beings, be they customers, be they people. So we've done that, and there's many other companies which are following that. And the next thing we're going to do is put part of IT in there too, because all the horizontal collaborative kind of infrastructure has to do with how people work, lead them to cross-trail networks and on business apps. So you put that together. And it's happening. There's a number of companies which are putting general services functions, these three actually together to force them to collaborate more together to benefit the people.
And that's what I was talking about in terms of our global business services. Mobility's in there as well. Anything that's touching the employee in some kind of way comes together to have that shared focus. Makes it, I think it's making a difference.
And the Worktech needs to do better targeted marketing to HR people next year.
So thank you very much.